Hello, everyone, and thank you for joining us in this next session. I'm Shannon Manders. I'm GTR's Editorial Director, and I'm delighted to welcome you to our speaker for this keynote interview. You all know him. He needs no introduction. He's a visionary in Africa trade and trade finance. Please welcome Professor Benedict Oramah, President of the African Export-Import Bank, AfreximBank, who's joining us today from Cairo. Welcome, Professor. It's fantastic to see you, and thanks so much for taking the time to share your insights with us.
Thank you very much, Shannon. I'm really pleased to be here. The pandemic has been a challenge to all of us, but we are really pleased that GTR remained focused to its purpose. We're happy to be here and we're participating in this event.
Fantastic, thank you. So let's start off by setting the scene and let's just get straight to it. So we're obviously living in unprecedented times. From where you're sitting as the head of AfreximBank, what is the current health crisis? In what ways is the current health crisis impacting trade flows with and within the African continent today?
Thank you very much, Shannon. Just like every other continent, Africa suffered the impact of the pandemic in different ways. Of course, the immediate impact was the health crisis. The health crisis in terms of the infections and also the deaths and the emotional impact on the people and the worries of the unknown that the pandemic brought at the beginning. But side by side, that was the socioeconomic crisis. From Africa's perspective, this was even worse because the health impact on Africa up to now has not been as devastating as in other parts of the world. As at today, we are talking of less than 40,000 people that have died from the pandemic. We're talking of about 1.5 million people in the whole continent, of about a 1.2 people. Plus about 1.5 million people infected. If you look at the death rate and also the recovery rate very, very high, about 90%. The jury is still out there as to why this is the case. We don't know what will happen with the second wave. But what the impact has been the most have been with the socioeconomic impact and trade. From the point of view of trade, as soon as the event started, of course, we had all these lockdowns globally and within Africa. It's expected that Africa suffered, at least in the first quarter and part of the second quarter, about 17% contraction in trade. We think that although the things are beginning to bottom out, that will not correct for this massive contraction we experienced earlier. Intra-African trade is estimated to, there are estimates that show that intra-African trade will contract by up to 20%, because it's only recently that countries began to open up their borders again. So in Africa, about 16 countries are landlocked. Even amongst countries that are not landlocked, a lot of goods move across borders, by road and also by truck and also rail. The borders were closed and these things could not be moved around. So we think the impact on intra-African trade might be quite high. But there are positive aspects of all of this. The pandemic brought to the fore the need for the continent to become more integrated. It brought to the fore the urgency of the AfCFTA, the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement that was signed 2 years ago. It also then brought to the fore the need for the continent to begin to diversify its supply chain so that it can begin to manufacture within the continent those critical needs, healthcare needs for the continent. Because when borders were closed around the world, many countries in Africa could not have access to those COVID-19 materials that are needed to manage the impact of the disease.
Thanks, Professor Oramah, and certainly challenging times, but fantastic to hear that there are causes for optimism. And I have heard some really great anecdotal stories about the manufacturing of PPE in Kenya, for example. Now, moving on, AfreximBank itself has rolled out a number of measures to help its member countries weather the economic and the health crisis brought on by COVID-19. But at the same time, we've heard that global banks are refocusing on their home markets. How has the pandemic affected access to trade finance specifically for companies across the continent?
Yeah, the impact has been massive, I can tell you. There's a survey ongoing now being conducted by AfreximBank, the UN Economic Commission for Africa, the African Development Bank, to assess the real impact. And we're trying to make sure we get as much coverage as possible. So we're trying to make sure we cover banks that account for more than 60% of the total assets within the continent so that we can get the true impact of this. But what I can tell you is that many, at the height of the crisis, many international banks withdrew because of the uncertainties and also the way the markets behaved at that time. What we've seen even before the pandemic came was the widening trade finance gap in the continent. The African Development Bank and AfreximBank estimate that the trade finance gap rose from about $90 billion in 2014 to about $110 billion in 2019. We are expecting from the survey that is ongoing now that this figure will rise to something close to $150 billion for 2020. This is massive. We see it from where we sit here in AfreximBank. Just within a few weeks and months of the pandemic, we had requests that we are going almost $30 billion to support trade within the continent. So that gives an idea of the constraints that the banks were facing, that the companies were facing. So the impact has been great and remains great, but we also see, of course, some changes beginning to happen as markets, as the countries begin to open up and markets begin to calm down. The international banks haven't started running back fully, but some of them are beginning to return. But the multilateral development banks and certain DFIs have actually played a very important role in helping to bridge the trade financing gap. And I must, at this point, thank the European Investment Bank, KfW, the AFD of France, and also the China Development Bank and so on, those who have come to support some of the African institutions at this time. There are also some commercial banks that continue to play a strong role, like Standard Chartered Bank, like Commerce Bank, the Bank of Tokyo Mitsubishi, the Sumitomo Bank, that also continue to support the trade despite all these challenges. And the regional banks and also commercial banks within the continent that are weathering the storm and continuing to support also deserve our appreciation. I must thank banks such as Standard Bank, Rand Bottom Bank, of course, UBA, EcoBank, Zenith Bank, FBN, and quite a lot of banks within Africa, and of course in North Africa, the big Egyptian banks have played very, very good role trying to help bridge the gap we're seeing. So what does that tell us? It tells us again that there is a need to make sure that African banks have the capacity to support African trade. That when the chips are down, every bank, every trade finance bank will first focus on its territory before they start looking outside. We've just seen it. There is a need for every continent, every country to try to make sure they have institutions that can at least stand up there and provide support when needed. And I'm pleased that we at AfreximBank played a significant role in that regard. We launched a pandemic trade impact mitigation facility, and within a period of 6 months, we had disbursed more than $6 billion in support of the different banks, central banks, commercial banks, and the corporations to make sure that they are able to finance the import of COVID-19 materials that are needed in the different African countries, to make sure that they are able to adjust in orderly manner to the shock that was brought about the pandemic. And when I mean shock is, there are trade debt payments that were all of a sudden falling due when international banks were withdrawing. So unless they got this kind of support they got from AfreximBank, some of them are going to default. And we know what happens when you have just one single default in a country. Banks run away. Markets have long memories but short vision. They will not forget that. Before they come back, it will take time. So we are determined to avoid what happened in the 1980s happen again. So we made sure that the banks had money to meet their trade debt payments so that they will remain in good standing, so that as international banks begin to come back, that they do not have any problems doing so. And that is why we are happy that we are beginning to see some of them beginning to get access again to international finance, because they did not default on LCs and similar trade debt obligations.
Thanks, Professor. And like you say, let's hope that continues. Certainly at GTR, we've been paying very close attention to what you guys at AfreximBank have been doing. Now, moving on, it's been said that Africa's economic recovery could be through intra-African trade, and we talked about some of the opportunities that the continent has been seeing recently, especially on the back of the African Continental Free Trade Agreement. If I can recall back to your introductory address at the AfreximBank annual meeting in Abuja, you talked about the importance of this agreement in integrating the continent, and you suggested that it would go some way to reversing the colonial legacy of divide and rule. It was a very rousing speech. Can you please share your thoughts on the progress of the deal and what it means for Africa economically and politically going forward?
Yeah, thank you very much. I think the Africa Continental Free Trade Agreement, I must say, is a landmark event. For the first time, African countries got together to take their destiny in their own hands. And those who doubted the need for this, I believe that the events we just saw from COVID pandemic must have erased all such doubt. The reason Africa is where it is today is because of Africa's colonial history that has divided the continent into 55 atomistic countries that can barely, some of them can barely stand as nation states. What is done is that it has made African businesses to know more about others outside Africa than they know more about those just across the border. So it has diverted trade, it has diverted opportunities for Africa to dynamize its economy by moving up the value chain. The situation we had, 55 countries that do not relate to each other, is at the root of why today Africa remains a commodity-dependent economy. And that is why the AfCFTA is extremely important. So the political act was also extremely important because that had always been the weakness. So the moment the African leaders made that move to sign the agreement, and not only did they make the move to sign the agreement, they also moved very fast to bring it into force. So within a year, the necessary ratifications were obtained to make the agreement effective. The trading was supposed to start on July 1 this year. But because of the pandemic, that has been moved to January 1, 2021. That is a slight delay, but what he has done is to give more time for the countries that have not ratified to ratify. So for the trading to start, there are a number of things that still needs to be done. And those things are being done now virtually. There are negotiations going on rules of origin. There are negotiations, exchange of tariff offers, and also with regard to services. We expect that those will be concluded. But from our point of view, we as AfreximBank are a strong partner of the African Union and the African Continental Free Trade Area Secretariat for implementing the treaty. We are supporting through grants to make sure that some of the activities that need to be done before trade gets started. But beyond that, we are doing other things. We are intensifying the financing we're providing for intra-African trade. Over the last 4 years, we've disbursed over $20 billion in support of intra-African trade. We expect that we will do much more than that in the coming years as trading starts under the AfCFTA. We have launched a few years ago, as you know, Shannon, a digital ecosystem, what we call the Africa Trade Gateway, which we believe will become the engine around which AfCFTA will operate. Amongst the platforms under that digital ecosystem is the payment platform. So the payment platform as the Pan-African Payment and Settlement System is a system we are developing together with the Association of African Central Banks. And it is intended to make it possible for intra-African trade to be paid for in local currency, that is African currency. To make it easier for a farmer in Zambia to use his or her phone to pay for a movie, a Nollywood movie in Nigeria, pay for that in Zambian kwacha, and the Nigerian movie maker will receive a Nigerian naira. It will become possible for the Egyptian manufacturer of pharmaceuticals to sell its pharmaceutical products to somebody in Ghana. That Egyptian receives Egyptian pound, or the Ghanaian will pay in Ghanaian cedi. We believe this will be a game changer for the continent. It will bring back the trade that had gone away from Africa because of currency issues. We think that will also then create the foundation for investments to come to Africa, because what is needed is to create the market to turn Africa into atomistic, disjointed markets, into a single market that's coherent, that people can see, where people can see opportunities, where investments can be made, and the future of investments can be seen clearly. We also are part of what we are doing under the digital platform. As you know, we finished building the African Customer Due Diligence platform. We know the problem in Africa, and it derives from what I said earlier, the issue of information, the colonial history that has divided the continent. So people don't know themselves. Even when they know themselves, they don't trust themselves, because what you don't know is a risk. So an African is more likely to trust somebody in America or Europe or China than they would trust somebody just across the border because they've never dealt with the person. So we developed the Africa Customer Due Diligence Repository Platform, what we call the MANSA platform, which will be a central repository of know your customer information for African entities. As you know, we've completed the technical development of this platform, and now we are populating it. In a couple of weeks, it will be open, it will be launched operationally so that people can begin to use it. We are also developing a trade information portal, a portal that is different from the traditional trade information portal people are familiar with. This one, we use artificial intelligence to predict supply chains and make it then possible for those who are looking for where to sell or where to buy within the continent to do so. Also associated with it is the trade regulations platform. Because we have 55 countries in the continent, if anybody wants to invest in the continent, the cost of searching is so high. If you want to know where do you go and invest, you do not know. You may have to go into 55 websites to know what the investment rules are in this country, and then start comparing. Now, under this trade regulations platform we have developed, you can go into one platform and see everything. And because we are putting it almost like a marketplace there, we will have, it will have the tendency of moving countries always to the best, because the platform will make it easier for others to see which countries are getting investments and then begin to check why are they getting the investment? Why are they attracting investors? Why don't we begin to change their own regulations to fit, to be like what these other countries are doing? So we can begin to have a convergence of good practices with regard to the regulations that we have in the continent. The other thing we are doing, which is really very important given the nature of the continent, is the work we are doing with regard to the transit guarantee scheme. Working with the African Union and the African customs organizations to develop a Pan-African collaborative transit guarantee scheme. There are about 16 countries that are landlocked, but beyond that, so many goods move across borders by road, by rail, and also by trade, by truck, all across. But if you want to move from, say, from Nigeria to Cote d'Ivoire, you have to post transit bombs to go from Nigeria to Benin Republic, from Benin Republic to Togo, from Togo, and so on and so forth, before you go to Cote d'Ivoire. That is very cumbersome. That makes it costly for those businesses to undertake this kind of arrangement. So what is being done, working with the African Union, is for AfreximBank to provide a single platform for issuing those transit bonds. So we will work with other transit guarantee bond issuers in different countries so that we will then concentrate it in one place and use blockchain technology to make sure that the customs services see the goods as they move. So we are trying to use technology to bring down the borders. We know that the borders will not just come down because we've signed the AfCFTA. We know that we can preach and preach for the borders to come down, they will not come down because what we have is something built over hundreds of years. So what we want to do is to use technology to bring the borders down. When we use technology to bring the borders down, then we will have the integration we are looking for. We will accelerate the process to a single market, building on the initiative the free trade agreement has introduced.
As usual, Professor Oramah, it seems like you have a lot on the boil and certainly addressing all of the main challenges that we hear about. So infrastructure, bureaucracy, local currency, and as an African banker told me just yesterday, trade deals are done with people that you know and that you like. And I think bringing people together and sharing this information with them is going to be a critical step moving forward. Now, another question that I wanted to put to you, Professor Oramah, you've been quoted, and this is changing tacks ever so slightly, but you've been quoted as saying that Africa has largely been on the periphery of rulemaking and global governance under the multilateral trading system. Can you talk us through the disadvantages that Africa has suffered under this system and what kind of reforms might be necessary to resolve the situation on the continent?
Yeah, you see, Africa has really been in the periphery. I mean, it's not a secret. And you can understand why. The Africa's share of global trade is 3% or less. So people can ignore Africa and do all the things they want to do without thinking of the continent. But I think that the approach in the long run is not good for the world. The continent is important in many ways. It supplies the world so many things. The reason is that it supplies so much at so low value. So what we have is a situation where when you now estimate the contribution, it becomes a very, very small amount in terms of financial. You know, if you look at money, you say, oh, they're not contributing anything. But who are the largest exporters of certain kinds of minerals in the world? Largest exporters of certain kinds of agricultural products in the world? Where do you have the largest amount of quantity of water you can use today to do things? Even arable land you can use to plant. It's in the continent, but it is ignored in many ways. And because of that, because Africa's voice is not in the normally heard within the multilateral trading system, some of the rules that are there do not favor the continent. If you look at what is happening today, despite all the efforts of the WTO, you see situations where tariffs continue to escalate by processing stages in the usual markets of our products. So if you export raw cocoa, you get it duty free into Europe. The moment you start processing it, you start attracting non-tariff barriers and other barriers, and nothing really is being done about them. We will talk about them, nothing happens. We're happy that now it looks like we have an African, Dr. Kundiwala, at the cusp of becoming the Director General of the WTO. We hope that that will help bring Africa's importance to the fore in the discussions there. We also hope that no matter the outcome, that whoever becomes the Director General, that Africa becomes a subject, not something that people talk about after they've said all the other things they want to say. Not that it becomes something that is a given, is there. So, but we can do other things, and whatever we say, that Africans will accept it. But what it also tells us is that apart from complaining, we ourselves must do something about it. And that takes us back to the AfCFTA. Unless we get together as one voice and do things as one voice in those multilateral trading negotiations and other discussions, our voice will only remain, I would say, noise to be heard, but nothing will come out of it. So AfCFTA will give that opportunity. It will give us the voice. It will give us, over time, the economic power. It will begin to change the narrative about the continent It will begin to change the share of Africa in global trade. It will also begin to make Africa an important part of the global value chain, so that the continent can always be brought to the table when things that affect it are being discussed.
Thank you, Professor Oramah. And I just have one final question for you. It follows very much from what you were just talking about, but as the visionary leader that you are, known to so many, what are your personal hopes for the future of African trade?
Yeah, thank you very much, Shannon. That is something I think about every time. And most of the things we do here at the bank is to make sure we shape that vision, to make sure that also we realize it in the future. Now, what do we want to see for Africa? We want a continent that trades more with itself. We've looked around the world. All the continents that are developed trade more with themselves. So we say, okay, maybe if we trade more with ourselves, maybe we would develop. I don't know the causality, but it's better to simplify it and say, well, let's trade more with ourselves and see if we develop. So we want a continent that trades more with itself. I want to see a continent that sees at least 40 to 50% of its total trade being intra-regional in the next, say, 10 years. Because that would then begin to enable the continent to develop dynamic comparative advantage in producing certain kinds of goods. We want to see a continent that is no longer a commodity economy. We want to see a continent that moves up the value chain, is related to trading more with ourselves. Because we've traded commodities for ages, and it has led us nowhere. So we really need to move up the value chain, just like others have done, so that we can also contribute to the global supply chain, so that we can also use that to create jobs for our people. We have a youth bulge that is not abating in any way. Unless we begin to do that, we're going to see a continent that's going to be in crisis, because people are going to be unemployed, and when they're unemployed, they will create all sorts of problems within the continent. We want to see a continent that is finally respected by all. Not a continent that people deal with just because they have to be they have to be do-gooders, but they will deal with the continent because they see the continent as equal partners in the discussions that they would like to have. We want to see a continent that is able to leverage the digital technology to overcome the challenges that are before it today. We want to see a continent using digital technology to leapfrog and get ahead, just like many others have done. A continent that will be able to overcome the challenges that are facing the multilateral trading system today, and yet be able to pull many out of poverty. And we believe that trade is what can do all of that. Trade that is driven from internal, the intra-regional trade, and then building the capacities to then move from that to becoming an important player for the global trading arena.
Professor Oramah, very well said as always. It's been an immense pleasure to speak with you today. Thank you so much for giving your time to coming and speaking with us. Thank you, and we hope to see you again very soon.